1.7 Relationship between states and federal government. So like we've been talking about, the framers tried to really balance the powers of the national government and the state government while still making sure that like the national and state government did all that they could and had to do. However, from the beginning, this was also a point of controversy. Like the national government trying to be able to rule over like the nation and extend its power in that way, but the states still trying to keep the power that they have. And so federalism has changed over time. And federalism is the sharing of powers between the national government and state governments. So it's kind of like this levels of power things, right? Like you have different levels in your government with different powers and roles assigned to each of them. We have a big idea right here. The U.S. Constitution establishes a system of checks and balances among branches of government and allocates power between federal and state governments. This system is based on the rule of the law and the balance between majority rule and minority rights. So, what provisions define federalism? So, some constitutional provisions, like in Article 6, you have the Supremacy Clause, and this places national law, treaties, and presidential action above state authority. So basically, whatever the nation does, the states therefore have to follow. So long as the nation and like national law is within the limits that Congress has set. And within the limits of like presidential stuff as well. Basically, so long as we're following the Constitution, whatever the nation does, states follow. Then Article 4 has the Full Faith and Credit Clause, protections of privileges and immunities, and extradition. So full faith and credit is basically states have to respect other states' laws. Privileges and immunities is all about like, no matter what state you're in, the citizen of another state is like allowed the same privileges and immunities. So basically, like, even though I'm not part of your state, I should be treated the same. Although, this doesn't follow, like, college tuition. If you go to a college in your state, then you probably have a lower tuition than somebody going from out of state. But the thing about that has to do with, like, taxes. You're in the state, you've been paying taxes, I think, is how they worked around that. And then extradition clause, that's all about, like, if there is a fugitive, like, criminal or whatever, the states will return it to the state from which they escaped. Here on page 58, I start it. There's a constitutional provisions little table, which I'm going to read really quick. Article 1, Section 8, enumerated powers of Congress, so like necessary and proper clause. Article 1, Section 9, powers that Congress can't have, treat all states the same, and they couldn't regulate slave trade before 1808. Article 1, Section 10, the powers that the states can't have, like treaties. Article 4, full faith and credit, privileges and immunities, extradition, which we just talked about. Article 6, supremacy of the national government, which we also just talked about. And then we're going to go to 9th Amendment and 10th Amendment. Later, I think, in this chapter, 9th Amendment rights that are not listed are still, like, the people still have rights to those. And the 10th Amendment is that powers that aren't given to the federal government are reserved by the states. Now, exclusive powers. These are powers that only the federal government has. Okay, so basically, Article 1 says that Congress can make laws on military, diplomatic stuff, international, and interstate commerce. And Congress can define crimes like counterfeiting, mail fraud, etc. And this is because some things need, like, consistency, no matter what state you're in. Like, you need to be using the same money. But, like we just talked about, there are limits. Article 1, Section 9, things that Congress can't do. States deal with prisons, state militias, etc. Elections, marriage laws, maintenance of deeds and records. States also have police powers, which are the powers to create and enforce laws on health, safety, and morals. So that means, like, hospitals and stuff. Speed limits, like that type of things. Now, concurrent powers. We were talking about different powers of the states and different powers of the federal governments, but some of them, they share. And those are concurrent powers. So they both, like, enforce laws and do taxes. Page 59, there's a little Venn diagram about sharing powers and federalism. However, this means that there's also can be some uncertainty with the overlap. For example, marriage. So, Federal Defense of Marriage Act, that defined marriage as one man, one woman. In states, usually we're like, if your marriage is respected in that state, then, like, we'll respect your marriage in our state. So, like, licenses held across states, marriage licenses. But as same-sex marriage began to be legalized, it was legalized in some states before others. And so some states refused to accept those marriage licenses. or recognize them, I guess. So, like, full faith and credit clause is that, like, if your marriage is held in that state, then it has to be held in our state as well. But the reserved powers in 10th Amendment means that our state can define marriage in our opinion, right? And our state might have a different definition of marriage than your state, meaning that in your state, you can get married fine, but we won't, like, allow that marriage license to be valid here. And then in Obergefell v. Hodges, same-sex marriage was guaranteed as a right. More about that in topic 1.8. And you get into a lot more of this stuff in 1.8 as well. Now, federal grant programs. So basically, you know how you have to, like, pay taxes to, like, the federal government? The federal government then distributes those taxes, and they'll distribute them to the states. This is also called, like, revenue sharing or fiscal federalism. So if you see those terms, it's basically the same thing. And so Congress has set these, like, kind of qualifications for many cases when they're doing this and distributing money. So states that qualify for aid will get this funding through grants and aid programs. And if they don't meet those qualifications, then they won't get their money. So it can work as, like, an incentive. Now, addressing national issues. Now, states are like, we don't want to, like, give up more of our authority, but we do want that money. So sometimes the government will, like, give the states money to do things that, like, the state needs to do, so long as the state, like, follows the guidelines that the national government sets. So categorical grants are grants that are given with guidelines and requirements from Congress. And they often have strings or, like, conditions of aid. And grants help lots of, like, organizations and people. Now, grants through the mid-1900s. Federal income tax meant that, like, national treasury was growing. So Congress could adjust more and more. The right to vote was, like, given to more people. And then the Great Depression came and the federal government gave more and more grants out. Societal concerns of the 1960s and 1970s. Concerns with, like, civil rights, school desegregation, clean air, clean water, and crime, all of that was gaining national interest. And 1966 is when we started having block grants. These are larger sums of money with less defined, like, uses. So it's, like, a lot of money with little to no strings. And Nixon used a lot of these because he wanted to give more authority to local governments. Fiscal conservatives really liked this idea. Congress passed 2 major block grants during his time, and although he didn't, like, achieve his goal of special revenue sharing, there was a lot of no-strings grants. Although this also meant that Congress was kind of losing control in a way because they didn't have the same control over how this money was used. They were just giving the money and then the states were using them themselves. Grants in the 1980s and beyond. So now, like, categorical grants are more popular again, normal. So they wanted to help upkeep highways, but also they wanted to help, like, lower the national drunk driving problem. That was what Congress was trying to do. And so they're like, we'll give you these grants if you raise your drinking age to 21. South Dakota v. Dole, Supreme Court was like, yeah, Congress can do that because it was for the general welfare of the public, and it wasn't, like, super vague or anything. So Congress could set restrictions like that on grants. Now, mandates. This is basically the federal government is telling the states what to do, and the states have to do it, and they get, like, no money. Okay, sometimes they get money, but, like, they have to do it, money or not. And these often address civil rights, environmental concerns, and other societal needs. So, like, yes, the government can set these types of regulations, such as Clean Air Act amendments, Americans with Disabilities Act, Civil Rights Restoration Act, Family and Medical Leave Act, National Voter Registration Act. None of those are bolded, but, like, if you want to pull an example, there's one of them. Clean Air Act is what it sounds like, regulations on keeping, like, the air clean. Americans with Disabilities Act was basically, like, these public spaces have to be accessible. Now, devolution is the return of power to the states. Ronald Reagan and his, like, new federalism idea was very in line with this. So, like, more block grants. And then Clinton signed Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act as Republicans continued to push these, like, ideas of devolution. So, like, welfare dollars were returning to the states. I hope you learned something. I hope this helped. I make other videos just like this. You should go check them out. I'm at Eileen Lee Reviews on YouTube as well. Thank you for watching. Tell a friend.